Hi, welcome back to my channel, or if you're here for the first time, welcome. I'm Stacey. I'm a therapist in private practice in the Jackson, Mississippi area, and this is Ask a Therapist. Every Friday, I bring you a brand new video answering questions that people have submitted to me. If you would like to submit a question, you can send me an email, AskStacey at StaceyAldridge.LCSW.com. Well, let's get right to this week's questions. I noticed on Quora or Quora, still not sure how to pronounce that one, that I had quite a few questions that were about hospitalization or going to a behavioral health hospital, being committed, things like that. So I thought that I would answer a couple of those questions and kind of have a theme for this episode. All right, so the first question comes from Mark, and he asks, do you have tips on staying safe once admitted to a mental health unit? I know that probably most people's ideas about what a mental health hospital, behavioral health hospital, or like the psych ward is like are based on movies, television shows, and pop culture. And a lot of what you see there is no longer accurate. Unfortunately, 100 years ago, the mental health hospital, behavioral health hospital, the industry had a very bad reputation of doing things that were unethical, and so it's no longer like what you might have seen in like American Horror Story or something like that. When you go to a hospital, whether it's a behavioral health unit in a larger medical surgical hospital, or if it is a freestanding behavioral health hospital or mental health treatment facility, whatever, it's going to be a lot like being in a regular hospital. Now, I've had the opportunity to work in a private behavioral health hospital, both in the inpatient and the outpatient departments. In the outpatient in the hospital, we did intensive outpatient and partial hospitalization. And I also had the opportunity to work in the behavioral health unit of a larger medical surgical hospital that was a nonprofit Catholic hospital. So I've seen those two perspectives on it. And I can say from both sides of it, that really the only difference that I see between any other hospital that you would walk around to visit someone that was hospitalized for a physical reason is that everything is locked down. So in the private hospital, we had one large inpatient section with a nursing station. Why can't I think of that word? Nursing station in the middle of it, and different hallways off of it. So very much like you would see in any other hospital. But to get out of that building to the parking lot, or to get to the hallway that led to some of the medical offices and a conference room, or to go to the cafeteria, the different wings, our different units, you had to swipe a badge. So everything was locked. So that's the main difference there. In the med-surg hospital that I worked in, we had 2 floors and multiple adult units in a freestanding 2-story building. And just like with the private hospital, there were different units that you had to swipe your badge to get in and out of. And other than that, the rooms looked very similar to regular hospital rooms. So in my experience, the main threat to the people in the hospital is boredom. Yeah, and I know that's not what people are thinking about when Mark asks this question, he's thinking about how do I stay safe from other people. Most of the people, no, I take that back. 99.9% of people that I have come in contact with who were inpatient for mental health reasons were not of any harm to anybody else. There were a couple people at the nonprofit hospital where anybody could be admitted regardless of if they had insurance, so we got a lot of homeless people there. I did have a couple people, and literally I'm saying like 2, maybe 3, that were getting stable on medication for schizophrenia, who were very paranoid, who did give off a vibe like, if you come at me, I might come at you. But they were not going around like trying to fight people. They were more interested in like, stay away from me, don't hurt me. Most people in the private hospital and in the less acute units of the nonprofit hospital were there for suicidal ideation and depression. So they're not going to mess with anybody. They sleep a lot. They're depressed. You know, they don't have the energy to be a threat to anybody else. So I'd say boredom and bad food are the main things that people worried with, complained about, didn't like. So you'd have to go into like a common area or a day room to watch TV, and not liking the food are the main threats, I think, that I have had people complain about or experience in my time. And I have probably 3 years cumulative experience working in a hospital setting, so it's not like I have like a decade in a hospital setting. I've also never worked in a state hospital that you have to be committed to. So it's possible that people there are a little bit more of a threat, but I hate to use the word dangerous, because we know that statistically people who have a mental illness are more likely to be the victim of a violent crime than they are to commit a violent crime. Because most of the time, if you're not going to mess with anybody, they're not going to mess with you. Yeah, so it may seem like a scary, dangerous place, but it's not a prison. It's not like a prison. The only way that I would say it's like a prison is in the sense that you can't leave whenever you want. You can't go wherever you want to go. You can't have your cell phone on you 24/7. So I'd say the main tips are don't be an asshole. Yeah, don't be an asshole to people and you should be fine. The next question comes from Jess. Jess asks, if you admit yourself to a mental hospital, can you leave whenever you want? I should have said at the beginning of this video that my experience is within the United States, so I can't say what it is like in other countries. So everything that I'm talking about is specific to the United States. So if you voluntarily commit yourself to a hospital for mental health treatment, you voluntarily commit is what they call it. But once you are there, most of the time it is up to a doctor, a psychiatrist, to decide when you can leave. When I worked for a private hospital, they really wanted people to voluntarily commit as much as possible. And for the most part, people did. To be involuntarily committed, a doctor has to order you to be on a 72-hour hold, or you have to be committed by the court. So the vast majority of people that I worked with were voluntary admissions. However, once you get into the hospital, it is up to a psychiatrist to decide when you can or should leave, because at that point you're under that doctor's care, so they're taking on the responsibility of your treatment as well as the legal liability. So I know of a couple cases where somebody got into the hospital and immediately insisted that they didn't need to be there and they wanted to leave, And in those cases, the psychiatrist would usually put somebody on a 72-hour hold so that they could be observed. And there was one particular time where there was somebody who had voluntarily admitted to the hospital who was known by the psychiatrist, known by the staff. It was somebody that came in and out of the hospital quite frequently. And they decided that they didn't want to be there. And rather than putting them on a hold, the psychiatrist made the decision to have them sign something saying that they were leaving against doctor's orders. So in other words, the psychiatrist said, we're not going to put you on an involuntary hold. You're not a danger to yourself or others, but I think you should stay. So if you insist upon leaving, you have to sign this saying that you're leaving AMA, is what they call it, against medical advice. And that is very similar to something that you would do, like say you went into the hospital or the emergency room for a physical reason and you declined treatment. Most of the time they will, again, have you sign something saying that you are leaving the hospital against medical advice. You are declining treatment. And the reason for that is pretty simple. If you're declining treatment, the doctors don't want you to come back later on and sue them because you didn't get treatment. So what they want to make sure is that you know that they don't think you should leave, and that if something happens, you or your family can't come back and say, look, the doctor let this person leave and then this happened, they shouldn't have let them leave. And then they have a document to say, look, I told them that they shouldn't leave. Most of the time, when you're in a psychiatric hospital, you're not going to be staying for a very long time. In the private hospital I worked in at that time, which is about 6 years ago, the average inpatient stay was 7 to 10 days, and that includes weekends. So 7 to 10 days. The nonprofit hospital that I worked for, the average stay there was 3 to 5 days. Part of that, I think, was because the nonprofit hospital took anybody, and usually the private hospital, you were going to have pretty good insurance that was paying for you to be there. Sad but true that payment and insurance does dictate what you're able to get for mental health and physical health treatment. So even if you voluntarily sign yourself into the hospital and then you want to leave and the doctor says you shouldn't, you're probably at best going to be on a 72-hour hold, and if you're not actively suicidal, you'll probably be released within 72 hours. So like in my first question, the main problem that you're going to come up against is that it's going to be boring, but that's a great time to, take some naps, read a book, go to group, learn some things. So even if you're there for 3 days and you don't really want to be, it's 3 days. It's not a huge deal. I also had a shocking number of people tell me that they said that they were suicidal because they were afraid they weren't going to get admitted to the hospital any other way, and they actually weren't suicidal. Please don't ever say that if you are not actually feeling like hurting yourself, because medical professionals do take that seriously. So it doesn't matter if once you get admitted to the hospital you want to leave and you say, oh, I just said that to get in here, I'm not really suicidal. We are going to take that seriously. Medical professionals, psychiatrists, therapists, nurses, everybody's going to take that seriously. So it's not something to joke about. It's not something to lie about to get admitted to the hospital. And I'm going to answer a third question because it's just still in the same theme. And I think a little of it got answered in the first two questions. But Catherine asks, what is it like spending time in a mental health facility? It's boring. I'm just going to be really honest. It's boring. It's usually quiet. It's peaceful a lot of the time, surprisingly. And usually it's kind of bland. I started wearing brighter colors. I was somebody that wore a lot of like gray and black and not a lot of colorful stuff, but the first hospital I worked in was so beige that it was depressing, so I started wearing a lot of brightly colored clothes to kind of brighten things up a little bit. But as somebody who is in the hospital, people spend most of their time talking to each other, reading books, writing in a journal, doing a puzzle, watching TV, complaining to nurses about things. Yeah, it's pretty mellow. So a typical day would be that you wake up, you go to the cafeteria to get breakfast, or in some cases they might bring breakfast to you and you eat in the common area. Then you would have a group, have a break, have probably another group, take a break, have lunch, go to another group after lunch, have a snack, maybe not another group, depending on how things work. Usually that second afternoon group in the private hospital I worked in would be an addiction group. So if you didn't have addiction issues, you'd probably skip that and just watch TV, hang out with other people, play cards, whatever. So then you would have dinner and hang out, watch TV, read a book, same basic things. Phones are not allowed, so you wouldn't be playing on your phone or texting or anything like that. And then go to sleep. A lot of people complained in the private hospital because they do 15-minute checks, because everybody who was suicidal or not suicidal would be in there together. So every single person that was there would be visually seen by a staff member every 15 minutes, 24 hours a day. So people would complain they didn't get a lot of great sleep because somebody would be opening their door and making sure that they hadn't tried to harm themselves literally every 15 minutes around the clock. It wasn't true in the non-acute units. In the nonprofit hospital I worked in, the acute unit would be people who were actively suicidal, so only those people would get checked every 15 minutes. But yeah, mostly pretty boring, not a lot of outside time. You know, it's going to be different every place, but for the most part, pretty sedate. Now, as a therapist counselor, my day in a mental health facility would go something like, get there in the morning, get a list of people who were admitted overnight, or if it was a Monday, get a list of people who were admitted over the weekend with information on whether or not the weekend social workers, counselors, therapists had done what paperwork for who, because sometimes they wouldn't get everything done. So go to my office, look over the list, see who was new, get paperwork together for each person. I would go read their chart, see what they had said to the assessment and referral department that decided whether or not to admit them. Call the person into my office, start asking them questions on their various forms, explain things to them, answer questions that they had. Usually would do a group at some point, and depending on the number of staff, the size of the hospital, you might have one group to do, you might have two groups to do, but with inpatient, people are in and out so quickly that usually the highest priority is getting that paperwork done. For people who were at the private hospital, we would also have to get a release to talk to a family member or someone if they had guns in the home, which this is Mississippi, like everybody has guns in the home, because we would have to get a family member or a friend to secure those guns before we would release the patient back to discharge. Because we know statistically, I try not to throw around a lot of statistics in these videos, but I do know a lot of random stuff because of my work with the National Alliance on Mental Illness. But one thing that we do know is that if people have access to a firearm, they are much more likely to complete suicide. So having those firearms out of the house, locked up, where they don't know where the key is. Making access to guns harder means that people are less likely to end their life if they choose to try. A patient, your day is going to be probably pretty boring, drag on, but for a professional, it was usually really fast paced, especially if we had gotten like 3 admissions overnight or 10 admissions over a weekend period. Then we would just be running constantly going. I've spent so much time filling out forms while standing up. The pace was so fast that the day would just fly by. So those are the questions this week. I hope that this has been informative and maybe giving you a better idea of what life is like in a mental health facility. It is not like you see on television. There are no straitjackets. People typically aren't screaming. Only really had one person that ever seemed like what you would see in a Hollywood portrayal of somebody with mental illness in all the time I was in the hospital. And that was a person that was waiting on a bed to go to the state hospital. They had been court committed, but they had to be someplace safe in the meantime. And sadly, a lot of those portrayals really promote stigma and harm people who need mental health treatment. So I definitely encourage you that if you feel like you need help in an environment where you're safe, to always go to the hospital. If you go to an emergency room and they tell you that you're okay, that's fine, but don't be afraid to seek help if you need it. So if you'd like to submit a question for me to answer, send me an email, AskStacey@StaceyAldridge, LCSW.com. You can also visit my website if you'd like to get more information about me or learn about coming to see me for therapy. My website is StaceyAldridge, LCSW.com. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that if you like this video, you will give it a thumbs up. It definitely helps me and my channel. And if you're interested in subscribing, please do so. As I said at the beginning, these Ask a Therapist videos come out every Friday, but I do also have a general interest video about mental health topics that comes out at least once a month. So if you're subscribed, you will never miss out on those. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.